It was all very nice, but I don't need nice. I just don't need it. I need something a bit more exacting, something that demands more of me, something that is not taking its cues from a culture that does not care for it.
Ruslan.
Before we get into that, guys, my name is Ruslan, and this channel exists to encourage, empower, and inspire you to live a life that blesses God. On this channel, we drop podcast clips and topics that are a little too spicy for the main channel. So if you're new here or if you're not new here, please make sure you're subscribed here too, as we're edging on 250,000 subscribers, and huge majority of you guys that watch this channel, unfortunately, are not subscribed. All right, let's jump into the video. Eastern Orthodox Christian calls out Jordan Peterson for this, and it's not what you think. Now, you guys know that I have a certain nostalgia and affinity for the Eastern Orthodox stream of Christianity, and this by far is probably my favorite Eastern Orthodox Christian right now. All right. Sorry, Neil. Sorry, Jonathan Peugeot. This dude is amazing. And he is a mythologist who started an entire mythology program at Stanford University. He runs his own school in the UK. And he is on a channel of another one of my friends who was on a channel many of you guys may be familiar with called Unbelievable. And this is his new channel. So you guys are going to get exposed to a fire new Christian YouTube channel. We're going to look at specifically his critique towards Jordan Peterson. And then we're going to hear his journey and what exactly brought him to orthodoxy. And it may shock you. If you guys aren't familiar with Martin Shaw, you should be, okay? Martin Shaw did an interview with Seen and Unseen. That is my friend Justin, formerly of the Unbelievable podcast. And here, the conversation comes up specifically about Jordan Peterson.
In terms of perhaps some overlap of your story with Lewis's, is that he too knew his mythology, he knew his stories from history, and there was a significant moment, obviously, when he put that together with the help of J.R.R. Tolkien, when he was able to see that Christ, Jesus, was the true myth, the one in whom all those mythologies of the past and even the future would only be echoes of this true myth.
I mean, what a great way to jump into a video. You're talking about C.S. Lewis, Mere Christianity, the myth that's fact, J.R.R. Tolkien, who wrote Lord of the Rings. Like, this is like everything that, like, I think Christianity is missing today, is like these sorts of like robust expressions of the faith. Now listen closely to what Martin says.
Does that ring any bells with what your experience has been?
Yes, it does. The myth made fact. That's how I suppose we would think of it. Every time you look at your modern life and you see a mythic thread in it, that is a myth made fact. It happens a lot, but it happens as a Christian. It happens in the most startling form in the years of Christ's life. As I said, born a fugitive, dies an outlaw. Is strange. I mean, people don't like to talk about this, but he's not always chiming with his own family. Even his own family is struggling. You know, this is not an Olympian wandering around. Now, just to clear something up in terms of mythology in Christ, what you get from skeptics is they will tell you that there's a kind of infrastructure to Christ's life that you find in, say, Odin or Egyptian gods, or maybe even in Dionysus. Now, here's the thing. There is an architecture which you can recognize. What you have that is completely unique in the life of Jesus is where the rubber hits the road is what he said. It's what he taught. It's what he went through. There are no other gods like that. There's no other God that has a dog in the race like our one.
Now he's spitting right here. He's talking about the archetypes, and he's talking about what he said and what he did is different. And then he's going to name check Jordan Peterson here.
And so that's the important thing. It is, and Lewis and Tolkien would agree with this, it's as if you're getting divine glimpses. It's like warm-up events, pinpricks of eternity through other spiritualities and mythologies that suddenly breaks into time and space in a way we understand, and you get this extraordinary thing happen. But you've got to be careful because there's a resurgence of interest, for example, in Jungian psychology, partially through Jordan Peterson and others. That's all well and good, and I know it back to front. But Christ is not an archetype, just to be clear.
Christ is not just an archetype, just to be clear. And how do we hear Jordan Peterson talk about him? It's the archetype. It's more than true. It's
structure,
it's
and hierarchy.
It's hierarchies. It's the way society is built. It's everything. The logos, right?
Yeah.
And he says, no. Christ is not just that. I'll play it one more time.
A resurgence of interest, for example, in Jungian psychology, partially through Jordan Peterson and others. That's all well and good, and I know it back to front. But Christ is not an archetype, just to be clear. He's not just a figure. He's not this just sort of, he has opinions, he has thoughts, he struggles. We have to deal as Christians with the strangeness that he's completely human and completely God, and all of that is going on. So one of the concerns, I think, as the wider conversations opens, is not to thin him out to a point where he just becomes one of a tapestry of interesting figures.
Yes.
Otherwise, there's no point in that.
Yeah. Yeah, I've been interested in that recently as well. And this idea of God as at the highest value. And I'm like, well, that's quite interesting, but he's not the highest value, is he? He's God.
He's God.
You know.
Yes,
He's
this is the
beyond
language
values.
that's often used, especially, you know, by Peterson, this Jungian, the highest value in your hierarchy of values or whatever. And I have a very similar feeling to you there, Martin, that, yeah, well, it's one way of looking at God, and there might be some psychological value, but that's certainly not the end of the story, right?
No.
Right.
Well, that's just blood of enchantment for me. That's, if you know what I mean. Like that's, anyway, I won't go there. Could you just break what you just said open for us a little bit in that, what is it? Could you give an example of what is it about Jesus as a mythologist where you get to it and you're like, oh, hang on, that breaks archetype. That's not what I'm expecting. That's not what we've been.
So remember, Martin Shaw is a mythologist. Mythologists are people who teach about storytelling, how to tell stories, how to speak. He's phenomenal. The talk I heard him give at Jonathan Peugeot's conference was nuts. So he's going to kind of go a little deeper on this.
Are there examples of where Jesus is quite disorienting?
Yes, I will. First of all, one of the words that are being bandied about a lot these days is the word pagan. You know, there is a sense somehow that there's a sort of a new paganism amongst us. But I say, like C.S. Lewis said, "Oh, bright vision, were it so." Because really, most of us need to become pagans for a while to become Christians. I like the idea we might be living in a pre-Christian society.
Yes.
I wonder if we haven't really given it a crack yet.
Rather than post-Christian, pre-Christian.
We'll have to change our intro. Then.
That's interesting. Living in a pre-Christian society.
But going back to what you were saying, which was
disorienting.
Yes, here we are. So in Homer's Odyssey, there's a moment where this main character, Odysseus, goes to the underworld and he has a conversation with Achilles, Brad Pitt, you know. And he says to Achilles, "How are you doing down in the underworld? How's this working out for you?"
Yeah.
And Achilles says, "Sooner be slave to a poor man than king of the underworld. It means nothing." And what he means by this is very important. It's this word kleos. Kleos in the Greco-Roman pagan world means imperishable glory. And in a pagan world, imperishable glory is the thing that you want. Now, the interesting thing about kleos is that you can't just have it in yourself. You can't just feel good about yourself and say, "I have kleos, I have imperishable glory." It has to be given to you. The reason it's so important is it's the one thing that humans have that the gods do not, because they never die. So they don't need imperishable glory.
Okay.
The pathos, and you find this in all the Greek myths, the pathos is always with the human characters. It's never with the gods. The gods are there for comic value. They're there to be frightening. But never, ever does a god give you the Sermon on the Mount. Never, ever do you hear the Beatitudes. And when you hear that stuff, the hair just starts to go up on the back of your neck because you're hearing something that seems so countercultural, so counterintuitive to the way we are designed to behave, seemingly, in a dog-eat-dog world. So right there and then. So I always say you hear a foreshadowing of Christ in the middle of the Odyssey. The last shall be first. As soon as Achilles, who's the greatest kleos of all, says, "Do you know what? This isn't working for me anymore." You can hear the druid is coming.
You guys should really go watch this entire conversation. I mean, this entire conversation is amazing. His testimony is really interesting. The way he comes to faith out in the woods and has like this supernatural experience. I don't want to spoil it for you, but I want to just highlight one last part where he shares how he comes to faith and then how he ends up being an Orthodox Christian. And this is not an endorsement of Eastern Orthodoxy. My mom grew up Eastern Orthodox. I grew up Armenian, Apostolic, Oriental Orthodox. But it is something to give us, it is something, especially those of us that are Protestants, to think about. The things he points out here, and I actually showed this to my pastor and he agreed. So this isn't me like on some rogue, like just saying stuff to say stuff. Like I think there's value here, especially if you're in church leadership, especially if you're a pastor, especially if you're a leader. There's a lot of value here. So listen to how he becomes Orthodox.
But I knew the notion that, you want to find a room in the church building. And I'd been to see the Baptists and I liked the Baptists, and I'd been to see the Catholics and I liked the Catholics. I'd been to see the Anglicans and I liked the Anglicans. It was all very nice, but I don't need nice. I just don't need it. I need something a bit more exacting, something that demands more of me, something that is not taking its cues from a culture that does not care for it.
I'm gonna let that sit. Listen very closly. Listen very closely.
There's more of me. Need nice. I just don't need it.
I just don't need nice. Okay. Now listen to what he says.
I need something a bit more exacting, something that demands more of me, something that is not taking its cues from a culture that does not care for it.
something that's not taking its cues from a culture that does not care for it. We've talked about this idea of syncretism. We talked about this idea of churches trying to synchronize Christianity with a culture that absolutely hates the God that they serve and represent. And us consistently taking our cues, even, I know this is going to sound super relevant to you guys, but even in the midst of this Drake and Kendrick back and forth and the culture, there's so much asinine, backwards aspects about the culture that Christians are taking their cues from a culture that hates us. We're taking our cues of value systems from a culture that hates us, from a world that wants nothing to do with us, right? And he's saying, I don't need a church to do that. I don't. That's not helpful. And I would say all of us included. All of us included.
More of me, something that is not taking its cues from something that demands more of me,
something that demands more of me, not something that lowers the bar, something that raises the bar.
Something that is not taking its cues from a culture that does not care for it. And I found that in Eastern Orthodoxy. I was wandering around a shopping centre, believe it or not, in Exeter. And in the middle of the shopping centre, there's no roof to this thing. There was...
No. What he's going to say next is going to... If you're already irritated with me, what he's going to say next is going to irritate you even more. Because the very thing that's was appealing to him is the very thing that many of you guys are going to have an issue with. Listen to how he stumbles into this church and why it was appealing to him. Listen.
This old red stone building. It's the oldest Christian building in Exeter. And I just happened to walk in the middle of something called Divine Liturgy. And it was the transformative church Christian experience of my life. There was a father who didn't seem remotely interested in how I was doing. I grew up, you see, with a very intimate version of Jesus. How are you doing?
Yeah.
You're right.
Yeah.
You know.
He said a father had wasn't interested in how he was doing.
I'm tired. Let it out. Let it out.
The seeker-sensitive Jesus.
Yeah. All of this. It was just one long back rub. And suddenly, now in poetry, you see, this sounds a bit abstract, but stay with me. In poetry, you have lyric and epic poems. Lyric poems are very personal, confessional, me. Epic is when your story gets amplified into something much bigger. And I wonder in the West if we've had an awful lot of lyric Christianity. And I'm really done with it. It's not that I don't want an intimate relationship with Jesus, but there's just something in there that's beginning. It never worked for me. Whereas the Orthodox thing, which seems from the outside probably a bit more remote, rather strange, it feeds me in a different type of way. And the liturgy of it, the beauty of it. I grew up in a Christianity that I think was a bit suspicious of beauty.
Sound familiar? Christianity that's suspicious of beauty, Christianity that's suspicious of goodness, suspicious of good art, suspicious of good music, suspicious of good craftsmanship, suspicious of people that are building things to serve people, and then they assume that because you're building something that serves people well, therefore you're building earthly treasure on earth where Rostin, right? Does this stuff sound familiar? The way this sort of language is manipulated, right? We have a low view of goodness. We have a low view of beauty.
Not sure about the old beauty. Could be leading you to hell, whereas actually I think, Jesus sprinkled a lot of God sprinkled a lot of beauty into this world for us to enjoy. So anyway, the long story is I found a home with Orthodoxy. And interestingly, Paul Kingsnorth is over in Ireland with the Romanians. I'm of a sort of a Russian variety, not a popular moment for that. And it just keeps feeding me and keeps getting deeper.
Wow.
Interesting, right? Martin Shaw, man, if you guys aren't familiar with him, check out that full interview. We'll try to pin it below when we release it. Definitely probably my favorite Eastern Orthodox voice right now. I love his storytelling stuff, the value of beauty and storytelling and learning to communicate, learning to use your words, I think is incredible. Thank you so much for checking out the video. Comment down below and let me know what you think. And be sure to check out this video that YouTube is recommending just for you. Let me know if they nailed it. All right? I'll see you over there. Peace.